Hello, my name is Calvin Draper. I'm 34 years old, single, and currently working as a doctor at Tenova Healthcare, Harton in Tullahoma, Tennessee, a quiet small town nestled among lush green hills and winding roads that stretch like ribbons of silk. Tullahoma isn't as bustling as big cities. It has serene streets lined with old oak trees, charming little coffee shops where locals gather to chat, and sunsets that blaze red as if the entire sky is on fire. I love this place, not just for its beauty, but because it's where I found the meaning of my life, and also where I lost the most important person to me. Today I'm sitting in my small apartment with sunlight streaming through the window onto my desk, where I'm scrolling through my phone. A sudden Facebook notification pops up, pulling me out of my endless train of thought. It's an old memory, a photo. It's me and my grandmother, Hazel Draper, standing at the Atlanta airport, both of us beaming with smiles. I was an 18-year-old kid, lanky with messy hair, hugging her tightly, a petite woman with snow-white hair and a gentle smile. But looking at the photo, my heart feels like it's being squeezed. That memory isn't just a moment. It's a deep, searing wound that still stings even after 16 years. That was the day everything in me changed. The day I realized my family wasn't what I had always believed it to be. I put the phone down, close my eyes, and the memories come rushing back. I don't want them to, but they come anyway, like crashing waves pulling me back to those old years. The days when I thought I understood family, love, and connection. I'm telling this story not to point fingers or place blame, but to answer a question that even I sometimes don't dare to face. I was born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina, a lively city with industrial districts and a relentless pace of life. My father, Gordon Draper, was an engineer, always busy with blueprints and construction projects. My mother, Janelle, was an accountant, perpetually buried in numbers and invoices. Our family wasn't poor, but it was never warm either. I don't doubt that my parents loved each other, but their love didn't seem to extend to me. They were busy. Always busy. The rare family dinners were quiet, filled only with the clinking of cutlery against plates and a few perfunctory questions. "How were your final exams, Calvin?" Or "What's your class rank?" I answered briefly, knowing they weren't really waiting for my response. But there was one place where I truly felt alive, where I felt loved, my grandmother's house in Tullahoma, Tennessee. Every summer I was sent there, and those were the best months of my childhood. My grandmother, Hazel Draper, was a petite but strong woman. She had been a nurse working long night shifts at the local hospital. She had divorced when my father was young, raising him and his sister Paula on her own with simple meals and sleepless nights. She never complained, but I could see the sacrifices etched in the wrinkles on her face, in the gentle yet profound look in her eyes. My grandmother's house was on the outskirts of Tullahoma, a small wooden home with a porch full of flowers and a backyard garden where she grew all sorts of things. Tomatoes, beans, and vibrant yellow marigolds. Every time I stepped into her house, I was greeted by the smell of freshly baked cookies, the scent of old wood from the floors, and a faint trace of antiseptic, a remnant of her years as a nurse. She always welcomed me with a tight hug, even though I'd been taller than her since I was 12. "Calvin, you're growing so fast I can barely keep up," she'd tease, but her eyes sparkled as if I were her entire world. Those summer days at her house were paradise. She taught me how to bake cookies, told me stories about her youth, her night shifts, the patients she saved, and the times she snuck bites of bread in the hospital break room. She laughed heartily, her voice clear and bright. But sometimes, when she thought I wasn't watching, I'd see her sitting by the window, staring into the distance, her hand gently tracing the edge of a family photo frame. In that frame were my father, Aunt Paula, and me, but she rarely spoke of my father or aunt. I was too young to understand why. I only knew that she loved us, even though we were rarely there for her. My father, after graduating college, became an engineer and moved to Greenville. He married my mother, and they built a stable life, at least on the surface. Aunt Paula, my father's sister, married Leon McAllister, a wealthy man in real estate, and they moved to Peachtree City, Georgia, a far more upscale place than Tullahoma. She had 2 children, Isabel and James, my cousins, whom I only saw a few times during holidays. Both my father and Aunt Paula left Tullahoma, leaving my grandmother alone in her small wooden house. They rarely visited, only calling on Christmas or Thanksgiving. Brief, polite calls devoid of warmth. At my grandmother's house, the walls were lined with framed photos of her children and grandchildren. She dusted them carefully as if they were treasures. But her eyes, when she looked at those photos, always carried a hint of sadness, as if she were waiting for something that would never come. I didn't understand it then. I just thought she missed her family. I didn't realize that their indifference had been eating away at her heart for years. My grandmother lived alone, but I never heard her complain. She tended her garden, rode her old bicycle to the market, and cooked simple meals in her small kitchen. I remember those summer afternoons when I helped her weed or water the plants, and she would tell me stories about her days as a nurse. Back then, I'd run around the hospital, sometimes not sleeping all night, she said, her voice full of pride. But every time I saved someone, it made all the exhaustion worthwhile. I admired her, not just for her strength, but for the way she loved people, an unconditional love even when she received so little in return. It was the same with her children. She sacrificed her youth and prime years to raise my father and Aunt Paula. Yet she never once asked for or demanded financial support from them, nor did she request they buy her this or that. I was young, not mature enough to fully understand, but I sensed the unfairness. Every time I visited her, I saw her gentle smile, but there was always a distant look in her eyes, as if she were waiting for a phone call, a hug, or just a sincere word of care. I tried to make up for it in my own way, helping her in the garden, listening to her stories, or simply sitting with her on the porch, watching the sunset. But I knew no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fill the void left by my father and Aunt Paula. Everything began to change in the spring when I was 18, just after graduating high school. I was in Greenville, preparing for my last summer break before college. One evening, my parents called me into the living room, the atmosphere unusually serious. "Calvin, we're planning a big trip," my father began, his voice brimming with excitement. "The whole family is going to Europe, Paris, Rome, London, a once-in-a-lifetime trip." My mother nodded, adding, "It'll include Aunt Paula, Uncle Leon, Isabel, and James. And of course, your grandmother." My heart raced as I listened. Europe. I had never left the United States, and the thought of going with my grandmother thrilled me beyond words. I imagined her standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, her smile as radiant as in those old photos, or sitting on a boat in Venice, sharing stories about her nursing days. It would be a perfect gift for her, the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for our family. But then I overheard my mother mention that the trip was expensive, and they were asking my grandmother to contribute financially. "She has savings from her nursing days," my mother said, her tone soft but calculated. "She'll want to help since it's a family trip." I felt uneasy but brushed it off. I thought if Grandma agreed, she must want this trip to happen. Naively, I believed everyone wanted her to be happy, that this was a chance for the family to bond and make up for the years she spent alone. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a strange shift in how the family treated my grandmother. My father started calling her more often, his voice sweeter than I was used to. "How's Mom doing? Eating well? I'm thinking of you," he'd say, but I sensed a lack of sincerity in his words. Aunt Paula called too, even sending gifts, a luxurious wool scarf that my grandmother carefully stored away, saying, "It's too nice to use." I saw my grandmother smile more during those calls, but her eyes held a trace of doubt, as if she sensed something wasn't right. Then one weekend, the entire family unexpectedly descended on Tullahoma. Me, my parents, Aunt Paula, Uncle Leon, Isabel, and James all crammed into my grandmother's small wooden house. The atmosphere that day was odd. Everyone was laughing, asking after her, but it felt like they were putting on a performance. My father sat beside her, holding her hand, talking about the Europe trip with infectious enthusiasm. "Mom, this is a chance for the whole family to be together. You have to come. It's what you deserve." Aunt Paula nodded, chiming in. Mom, we want you to be happy. Come with us, please. Isabel and James, my cousins, sat quietly, glued to their phones, barely engaged. My grandmother sat silently, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. She shook her head, her voice soft. I'm old. My health isn't good. I don't think I can handle such a long trip. But my father didn't give up. He described the beautiful destinations, how the family would be by her side, how this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Aunt Paula joined in, her voice sugary sweet. Mom, I want you to see the world. You've worked your whole life. Now it's time to rest. I sat there watching her, hoping she'd agree. I wanted her to be happy, to leave that wooden house and see new things. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes gentle. If Calvin wants me to go, then I'll go, she said, offering a faint smile. I hugged her tightly, my heart pounding with joy. Please go, Grandma, I'll take care of you, I promised, unaware that I was unwittingly pushing her into a trap. The next day, I overheard my parents whispering in their room. She transferred the money, my mother said, her voice low but clear enough for me to hear. All of her savings. I froze outside the door, a wave of unease washing over me. All her savings. That was the money she had scrimped and saved her entire life, from those grueling night shifts, from the meals she skipped to raise my father and Aunt Paula. I wanted to ask, to understand why they took all her money, but I didn't dare. I told myself the trip would be worth it, that she'd be happy. I tried to shake off the discomfort, but it clung to me like a small thorn pricking my heart. In the days that followed, the family buzzed with excitement like never before. My parents discussed the itinerary, luxurious hotels and famous restaurants. Aunt Paula sent messages to the family group chat showing off photos of Paris from her previous trips. Isabel and James, for the first time, seemed interested, talking about shopping in London. I got caught up in it too, imagining the family gathered together, laughing and talking. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I saw it in my grandmother's eyes when she called me, her voice gentle but tinged with worry. Calvin, are you sure this trip will be fun? I reassured her, saying everything would be wonderful, but I didn't know I was lying. Not just to her, but to myself. Sitting in my Tullahoma apartment now, I can't help but blame myself. I was too naive, too trusting of my family's promises. I didn't see the deceit behind their smiles, didn't realize that the Europe trip wasn't a gift for her, but a carefully laid trap. But I was about to find out, and that truth would change everything, would make me see my family in a different light, and would lead me to a decision I never thought I'd have to make. In the days leading up to the Europe trip, the atmosphere in our Greenville home became so lively it felt like I was living in someone else's house. Suitcases were packed to the brim, passports were meticulously checked, and my parents couldn't stop discussing the itinerary. Paris first, then Rome, and finally London, my father said, his voice brimming with excitement, as if he'd been planning this trip his entire life. My mother, usually stern, smiled more often and even bought me a new pair of shoes to look presentable in Europe. I got caught up in the excitement, forgetting the unease that had once gnawed at me. All I could think about was traveling with my grandmother, seeing her smile happily at famous landmarks I'd only read about in books. My grandmother arrived at our house a few days before departure. She took a bus from Tullahoma, bringing along an old dark green suitcase, the kind people used in the 70s. When I ran out to greet her, she hugged me tightly, the faint scent of antiseptic from her clothes making me feel safe, like I was back in her house during those summer days. She smiled, saying, Calvin, let me crash at your place for a few days, okay? Her voice was warm and cheerful, but I sensed she was hiding something. I helped her carry the suitcase inside, noticing it was lighter than I expected. Not packing much, Grandma? I asked, half joking. She laughed, ruffling my hair. I'm old, don't need much. Having you is enough. In the days that followed, my grandmother and I were inseparable. Every night I slept in the living room with her on an old inflatable mattress my mother had long planned to throw out. She told me stories about her nursing days, how she always kept a piece of candy in her pocket for the kids in the pediatric ward, and happy memories of my father and Aunt Paula. I lay there listening to her steady voice, feeling like the world had shrunk to just the two of us. "Do you think you'll like Paris or London more?" I asked, my eyes sparkling. She paused for a moment, then nodded. "I'll go anywhere as long as you're with me." I grinned, hugging her tightly. The night before our departure, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the sofa watching my grandmother sleep soundly on the inflatable mattress nearby. Moonlight from the window illuminated her face, highlighting the wrinkles, marks of her years of sacrifice. I told myself this trip would be a gift for her, a chance for her to see that the family still loved her. I didn't know I was dreaming, that what was about to happen would shatter that dream into pieces. On the day of departure, the house was buzzing with nervous excitement. My father checked the plane tickets, my mother organized the luggage, and I helped my grandmother tie her shoelaces. She insisted on wearing her old, comfortable shoes. We piled into the car and drove from Greenville to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta, a nearly 3-hour trip. In the car, my parents chatted and laughed, but my grandmother was quiet, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes gazing out the window. I held her hand and whispered, "Don't worry, Grandma, it's going to be so much fun." She smiled, but it was a frail smile, as if she was trying to reassure me. When we arrived at the airport, Aunt Paula's family was already waiting in the main terminal. Aunt Paula wore a striking red coat. Uncle Leon stood beside her with sunglasses like he was vacationing in Hollywood, and Isabel and James were glued to their gaming devices. "Hazel, how are you, Mom?" Aunt Paula said, giving my grandmother a quick, perfunctory hug. Uncle Leon nodded in greeting, while Isabel and James barely looked up from their screens, only glancing for a second before returning to their games. My grandmother seemed a bit uneasy but smiled, trying to blend into the mood. We wheeled our suitcases to the check-in counter. The airport was bustling with constant loudspeaker announcements, the smell of coffee from a nearby stand mingling with the sound of suitcase wheels rolling on the floor. I stood next to my grandmother, eagerly watching the line of people, imagining us boarding the plane and starting our adventure. But then I noticed something was wrong. My father was talking to an airport staff member, his voice slightly sharp. My mother stood beside him, her face tense. Aunt Paula and Uncle Leon were whispering to each other, their eyes avoiding my grandmother. "Grandma, it's our turn," I said, pulling her forward. But she stood still, her expression confused. "Calvin, wait. Where's my ticket?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp, as if she'd just realized something. I looked at my father, waiting for him to respond. But he turned around, his face slightly flushed, and said, "Mom, there's a slight issue with the booking system. Your ticket, it seems it hasn't been confirmed." My heart skipped a beat. Not confirmed. How could that be? This trip had been planned for months. "What do you mean, not confirmed?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. My mother stepped in, her tone soothing but artificial. "Calvin, calm down. It's probably a system error. We'll sort it out later." But my grandmother wasn't easily placated. She stepped forward, looking directly at my father. "Gordon, tell me the truth. Did you never book a ticket for me?" Her voice was calm, but I could hear the hurt in it, like a crack spreading wider. My father hesitated, glancing at my mother as if seeking rescue. Then he sighed and said, "Mom, you're getting old and your health isn't great. A trip this far isn't practical. Stay home and rest. We'll take you somewhere closer next time." His words were gentle, but they hit me like a slap in the face. Stay home? Next time. I looked at Aunt Paula and Uncle Leon, hoping they'd speak up, but they were busy talking to each other as if this had nothing to do with them. My grandmother stood there, clutching the handle of her suitcase, her eyes desolate. I saw her shoulders tremble slightly, but she didn't cry. She just looked at my father, then my mother, then Aunt Paula, as if searching for a shred of truth in their eyes. But no one met her gaze. I felt my blood rushing, my heart pounding. "Dad, Mom, what are you talking about? She paid for this trip. How could you do this to her?" I nearly lost control, my voice drawing glances from people nearby. "Calvin, calm down," my mother snapped. "You don't understand. This is adult business." But I couldn't calm down. I looked at my grandmother, her face crumbling despite her efforts to stay composed. In that moment, I realized they had never intended to take her along. All of her savings, the money she had painstakingly saved from her night shifts, from the meals she skipped to raise my father and Aunt Paula, had been taken not to bring her joy but to fund their lavish trip. It felt like the ground beneath me collapsed. All the promises, the sweet phone calls, the sudden visits, it was all an act. I looked at my parents, Aunt Paula, Uncle Leon, and even Isabel and James, the people I once called family. But now they were strangers, people who had exploited my grandmother's trust, and mine. "Grandma, I'm not going. I'm staying with you," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. She looked at me, her eyes welling up, but she shook her head. "Calvin, you have to go. Don't miss this opportunity because of me." But I didn't listen. I couldn't board that plane, couldn't sit with the people who had betrayed her. "No, Grandma. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here with you." My father stepped forward, his eyes cold. "You're being foolish, Calvin. If you want to stay with her, fine. You two can figure it out." Aunt Paula chimed in, her tone mocking. "Calvin, don't be childish. Are you trying to ruin the trip for everyone?" I didn't respond, only glaring at them with unforgiving eyes. Uncle Leon smirked, muttering something about impulsive kids. Isabel and James looked up, staring at me like I was some kind of weirdo. Then, without an apology, without even a glance back, they turned, wheeled their suitcases, and walked toward the boarding gate, leaving my grandmother and me stranded in the crowd. I stood there, clutching my grandmother's hand, feeling like the world had just collapsed. She didn't say a word, just stood silently, her eyes vacant as she watched the backs of her children and grandchildren disappear. I wanted to scream, to run after them and demand answers, but I knew it was pointless. They had made their choice. They chose their own pleasure, their selfishness, and abandoned my grandmother like she was something worthless. "Grandma, let's go home," I said, my voice choked, trying to stay calm so she wouldn't worry. She looked at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. I pulled her suitcase, guiding her out of the check-in area, moving quietly through the bustling crowd. I hailed a nearby taxi and headed straight for Tullahoma. As the car drove off, I sat beside my grandmother, holding her hand tightly. She didn't speak during the long ride, just stared out the window, her face expressionless. Then halfway through the journey, she turned to me, her voice soft as a breeze. "Is it because I'm poor, because I'm outdated, that they didn't want me to come, Calvin?" Her question stabbed my heart like a knife. I wanted to scream, to tell her no, that she was the most wonderful person I'd ever known. But I only held her hand tighter, whispering, "No, Grandma, it's not your fault. They don't deserve you." She nodded, but I knew she didn't believe me. Her eyes still carried that pain, the pain of a mother, a grandmother who had sacrificed her entire life only to be betrayed by her own children. When the taxi stopped in Tullahoma, it was already dark. I brought my grandmother back to her familiar wooden house, where the smell of cookies and old wood still enveloped us. She walked inside, sat in her armchair, and clutched the family photo frame. I knelt beside her, hugging her tightly. "Grandma, I won't let them hurt you again," I said, my voice breaking. At that moment, I didn't know what I would do, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't let this be swept under the rug. Never. I stood up to find the light switch, turning on more lights to try to brighten the room, but it couldn't dispel the gloom that enveloped us. My grandmother remained seated, her frail hands clutching the photo frame, her eyes fixed on the smiling faces in the family picture. My father, my mother, Aunt Paula, Uncle Leon, Isabel, James, and me. But now those smiles felt like a lie. My heart felt like it was being squeezed. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but the words were stuck in my throat. How could I ease her pain when the people closest to her had betrayed her? "Calvin, go to your room, it's late," she said, her voice weak, forcing a smile. but I shook my head, holding her hand tighter. "I'm not going anywhere, Grandma. I'm staying here with you." She looked at me, her eyes glistening, but she didn't cry. My grandmother was strong, stronger than anyone I'd ever known, but I could see the crack in her heart, deep and painful. I couldn't let this go, couldn't let my parents and Aunt Paula enjoy their lavish trip funded by her life savings while she was left behind like something worthless. I stood up to make her a cup of tea, trying to keep busy so the anger wouldn't consume me. In my mind, the scenes from the airport replayed endlessly. My father's cold gaze, my mother's mocking tone, the way Aunt Paula turned away as if my grandmother didn't exist. And my father's words, "Figure it out yourselves," rang in my head like an alarm bell. They thought I'd stay silent, that I'd obediently return and forget everything. But they were wrong. The next morning I woke up early, determined to do something. My grandmother was still asleep, her face peaceful as if yesterday's pain was just a dream. I quietly closed her bedroom door and stepped out onto the porch where her yellow marigolds swayed in the early morning breeze. I opened my phone, searching for information. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, only that I needed someone or something to help my grandmother get justice. After some browsing, I found the website for Adult Protective Services, or APS, an agency that protects elderly people from financial, physical, or emotional abuse. My heart beat faster. This could be the answer. I read every line on the website carefully. APS assisted cases like my grandmother's, elderly individuals exploited by their own family members. They could investigate, gather evidence, and even take the case to court if necessary. I wrote down the phone number for the APS office in Tennessee, feeling a glimmer of hope. But then I paused, wondering, was I going too far? These were my family, my parents, Aunt Paula, Uncle Leon. Should I drag them into a legal battle, making a big mess? I looked at the wooden house, thought of my grandmother's desolate eyes at the airport, and knew I had no other choice. If I did nothing, they'd continue to hurt her, or worse, hurt someone else. I called APS that morning, my voice trembling as I spoke to a caseworker named Dorian Hale. I recounted the entire story. The Europe trip, my grandmother's savings, how my parents and Aunt Paula convinced her, and the painful truth at the airport. Dorian listened, asking concise but pointed questions. "Does your grandmother have proof of the bank transfer? Were there any witnesses at the airport?" I told him I'd check her bank statements, and I remembered that an airport staff member had seen the argument. "All right, Calvin," Dorian said, his voice reassuring but serious. "You and your grandmother need to come to the APS office to provide more details. We'll look into this case." When I hung up, a mix of relief and anxiety swirled within me. I knew I was stepping onto a difficult path, but I couldn't turn back. I went back inside and found my grandmother sitting at the kitchen table holding a cup of coffee, her eyes distant. "Calvin, you're up early," she said, managing a faint smile. I sat beside her, taking a deep breath. "Grandma, I just called an agency that protects elderly people. I want them to investigate what Mom, Dad, and Aunt Paula did. I want them to return your money." She looked at me, her face momentarily stunned. "Calvin, you don't have to," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't want to make a big deal out of this. They're my children, after all." I held her hand, feeling her frail fingers tremble. "Grandma, they don't deserve your forgiveness. They took your money, lied to you, and abandoned you. If we don't do something, they'll think they can keep doing this. Not just to you, but to anyone." She looked at me, her eyes wavering between pain and pride. After a long silence, she nodded. "If you think it's right, I trust you." In the days that followed, I took action. I went to the local bank in Tullahoma, where my grandmother had her account. The bank teller, a middle-aged woman named Martha who had known my grandmother for years, listened to my story. Her face shifted from surprise to anger. "Hazel is the kindest person I know," she said, her voice trembling. "How could her children do this?" She helped me retrieve my grandmother's bank statements, which clearly showed the large transfer she had made to my father. The amount, over $30,000, was everything she had. saved from her years as a nurse, from the meals she skipped to raise her children. I also contacted the Atlanta airport, inquiring about the staff member at the check-in counter that day. Luckily, an employee named Holly remembered the incident. "I saw the older lady standing there looking so confused," Holly said over the phone. "I heard her son say something about her not going because of her health, but the way they treated her, it didn't feel right." Holly agreed to provide a statement if needed, and I felt like I'd found a crucial piece of the puzzle. My grandmother and I went to the APS office in Tullahoma on a drizzly morning. Dorian Hale, the caseworker, greeted us with a friendly but professional smile. He was a tall man with a deep, warm voice, but his eyes were sharp, as if he could see through any lie. I recounted the entire story, presenting the bank statements and Holly's contact information. My grandmother sat beside me, adding a few details, her voice calm but laced with hurt. "I just wanted my children and grandchildren to be happy," she said, staring at the floor. "I didn't think they'd do this to me." Dorian took careful notes, nodding. "Mrs. Hazel, Calvin, we have enough grounds to open a formal investigation. Financial abuse of an elderly person is a serious crime. We'll contact the involved parties and verify everything." He looked at me as if recognizing the determination in my eyes. "You've done well, Calvin. Not everyone has the courage to stand up to their parents like you have." As we left the office, my grandmother held my hand, squeezing it lightly. "Calvin, are you sure this is the right thing?" she asked, her voice full of worry. "I don't want the family to fall apart." I stopped and looked into her eyes. "Grandma, family isn't people who hurt each other. Family is those who love and protect each other like you've done for me. I won't let them hurt you anymore." She nodded, and for the first time since the airport, I saw a small spark in her eyes. Not joy, but trust. While waiting for APS to investigate, I stayed in Tullahoma with my grandmother. I spent time with her, helping in the garden, cooking simple meals, and listening to her stories. She often smiled when she caught my eye, but I knew she was trying to stay strong. Every time I saw her dusting the family photo frame, my heart ached. I wanted to tell her to throw it away, but I knew she couldn't. No matter what they did, they were still her children, and her love for them wouldn't easily fade. I also started keeping a journal, writing down every detail of what had happened, from my parents' sweet phone calls to the sudden visit in Tullahoma to the betrayal at the airport. I didn't know if these words would be useful, but they helped me stay resolute. Every night after my grandmother went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table writing and telling myself, I have to do this. For her. For justice. About a week later, Dorian called with an update. Calvin, we've contacted the bank and the airport staff. The evidence is clear. We'll be sending summons to your parents and aunt in the next few days. Are you and your grandmother ready to go to court if necessary? I took a deep breath, feeling like I'd stepped onto a path with no turning back. Yes, we're ready, I said, though a trace of fear lingered in my heart. In the days following Dorian's call, I felt like I was living in a state of limbo, caught between determination and unease. I stayed in Tullahoma, unwilling to leave my grandmother's side for even a moment. The small wooden house remained my safest haven, but now it carried a different feeling, like a fortress where my grandmother and I were preparing for a battle I never imagined I'd have to face. I didn't talk much about the investigation with her, not wanting to add to her worries, but I knew she sensed the tension in me. Every time I looked at her sitting by the window with that distant gaze, my heart tightened. She didn't deserve this. Not at all. While waiting for the summons to be served, I kept writing. My journal was no longer just a collection of memories. It had become a detailed indictment. Every phone call from my parents, every sweet word from Aunt Paula, every averted glance at the airport. I wrote to keep my mind clear, to avoid being consumed by anger or pain. I also called Holly, the airport employee, to thank her for agreeing to be a witness. You're doing the right thing, Calvin, she said over the phone, her voice warm but serious. I've seen a lot of people treated badly, but the way your family treated that elderly lady, it's just unacceptable. Her words bolstered my resolve but also broke my heart. I still couldn't believe my family had come to this. My grandmother, though she didn't say it, seemed to be preparing herself in her own way. One morning I saw her take down the family photo frame, wiping it carefully as she always did, but instead of hanging it back on the wall, she placed it face down on the table. "Grandma, why'd you do that?" I asked gently, not wanting to upset her. She looked at me, offering a sad smile. "Calvin, I don't want to see those faces anymore. It's not that I'm angry, I'm just tired." Her words cut like a knife, but I understood. She wasn't just tired from what had happened, but from the long years of waiting for love from the children she had sacrificed her life to raise. Nearly 3 weeks after the airport incident, I got word from Dorian that the summons would be hand-delivered to my parents and Aunt Paula. "If they don't cooperate, we'll take the case to court," Dorian said. "You and your grandmother should prepare yourselves." I nodded over the phone, feeling like a ticking bomb was inside me. I didn't know how my parents and Aunt Paula would react when they received the summons. Would they be angry, apologize, or keep pretending nothing had happened? I didn't dare think too much, only knowing I had gone too far to turn back. I decided to return to the Atlanta airport one more time, not to confront them, but to witness their return. I wanted to see their faces, to know if they felt any remorse for what they'd done. I didn't tell my grandmother about this plan, afraid it would worry her. Instead, I said I needed to run errands in the city, and she nodded, telling me to be careful. "Calvin, you're my only comfort," she said, ruffling my hair like when I was a child. I smiled, but my heart was heavy. I didn't want her to pin her hopes on me because I wasn't sure I could deliver the justice I'd promised. On the day they returned, I informed Dorian of their flight's arrival time so he could prepare the necessary documents. Then I took a taxi straight to the airport. I waited in the arrivals area at Hartsfield-Jackson, blending into the crowd. I had my phone ready, set to record video, not to gloat or seek revenge, but to capture the truth, another piece of evidence if needed. My heart pounded as I watched the stream of people emerge from the arrivals gate. Then I saw them. My parents, Aunt Paula, Uncle Leon, Isabel, and James. They were laughing and chatting, pulling suitcases adorned with stickers from European cities. My father wore sunglasses, looking like a tourist back from a luxurious vacation. My mother held Aunt Paula's arm, both laughing loudly as they talked about a restaurant in Paris. Isabel and James scrolled through their phones, showing each other selfies taken in front of the Eiffel Tower. They looked happy, carefree, as if they hadn't abandoned my grandmother, hadn't taken her life savings. I stood there, feeling like the blood in my veins was boiling. But then I saw a familiar figure in a suit approaching them, holding a stack of documents. It was Dorian Hale. He walked up, his voice calm but sharp. "Mr. Gordon Draper, Mrs. Janelle Draper, Mrs. Paula McAllister, Mr. Leon McAllister, I'm Dorian Hale from Adult Protective Services. I have summons related to allegations of financial abuse against Mrs. Hazel Draper." The air froze. The smile on my father's face vanished. My mother stood stunned, and Aunt Paula's eyes widened, clutching her purse as if it could shield her. "What? This is some kind of mistake," my father snapped, his voice trembling slightly. Dorian remained composed, handing each of them a summons. "You'll have time to explain. Please read these carefully and contact us within a week." Isabel and James exchanged looks, clearly confused about what was happening, but I saw irritation in their eyes. Uncle Leon muttered something under his breath while Aunt Paula turned to my mother, whispering, "Hazel did this? She dares to sue us?" I stepped out from the crowd, unable to hold back any longer. "No, it wasn't, Grandma," I said, my voice cold as ice. "It was me. I reported you to APS. Did you think you could take her money, abandon her, and then go enjoy yourselves?" My father stared at me, his face red with anger. "Calvin, you're out of your mind. You dare do this to your family?" My mother cut in, her voice shrill. "You're ruining the whole family, son. Aren't you ashamed?" Aunt Paula just shook her head, sneering. "You're just like your grandmother, foolish and stubborn." I didn't respond, only staring into their eyes one by one. I saw anger, panic, but not a trace of remorse. They didn't apologize, didn't ask about my grandmother, didn't acknowledge their mistake. I turned to Dorian, nodding. Thank you. I'll see you at the office. Then I looked at my parents and Aunt Paula one last time. I'll be with Grandma. Don't look for me. I turned and walked away, feeling like I had just severed the final thread connecting me to the people I once called family. On the way back to Tullahoma, I didn't cry, but my heart was heavy. I had done the right thing, I knew that, but why did it hurt so much? I thought of my grandmother, of her question at the airport. Is it because I'm poor, because I'm outdated? I vowed to myself that I'd never let her ask that question again. I would protect her no matter the cost. When I got home, my grandmother was sitting in her armchair, holding an old book, but her eyes unfocused. Calvin, where have you been all day? She asked, her voice gentle but worried. I sat beside her and told her everything, from going to the airport to confronting my parents and Aunt Paula to the APS summons. She listened without interrupting, but I saw her shoulders tremble slightly. Calvin, I didn't want you to face them, she said, her voice choked. They're still your parents, your family. No, Grandma, I said, holding her hand tightly. Family is those who love and respect each other. They don't deserve to be my family. You are my family. She looked at me, her eyes welling up, then hugged me tightly. For the first time since the airport, I saw her cry. Not from pain, but from emotion. Thank you, Calvin, she whispered. I don't know what I did to deserve a grandson like you. In the days that followed, my grandmother and I tried to return to a normal routine, but I knew we were both waiting for something. A response from my parents, from Aunt Paula, or from APS. I continued working with Dorian, providing additional information when he requested it. He said my parents and Aunt Paula had contacted APS, trying to claim that my grandmother's money was a voluntary gift. But Dorian wasn't easily swayed. We have the bank statements, the airport employee's testimony, and Mrs. Hazel's account, he said. They'll have to face the consequences. I didn't know what those consequences would be, but I knew one thing. I had chosen to stand by my grandmother, and I would see it through to the end. I looked at her, watching her tend to her garden, clean the wooden house, and now she had me by her side. And I made a silent promise to myself that no matter what happened, I would never let her be alone again. The day of the court hearing was set, and I felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on my shoulders. The trial would take place at the local courthouse in Tullahoma, a small but dignified building with red brick walls and oak trees surrounding it. Dorian had prepared everything, the bank statements, the testimony from Holly, the airport employee, and the detailed accounts from me and my grandmother. But my grandmother refused to attend the hearing. I don't want to see them there, she said, her voice soft but resolute. Calvin, you go in my place, I trust you. I wanted to protest, to have her there to witness justice being served, but I understood. Facing my parents and Aunt Paula in the courtroom would be like rubbing salt into her wounds. I nodded, hugging her tightly before leaving the house. I'll do my best, Grandma, I promised, though I wasn't sure I had the strength to face them. On the morning of the hearing, I wore a white dress shirt that my grandmother had carefully ironed for me, clutching the folder of documents Dorian and I had prepared. As I stepped into the courtroom, my heart pounded so hard it felt like my whole body was trembling. My parents and Aunt Paula were already there, seated on the other side of the room with a lawyer in a gray suit who looked stern but confident. My father glared at me, his eyes cold as if I were the traitor. My mother kept her head down, avoiding my gaze. Aunt Paula shot me a scowl, her lips tightly pressed together. Dorian glanced at me, giving an encouraging nod. Stay calm, Calvin. The truth is on our side, he said. I nodded, trying to breathe evenly, but it felt like the air in the room was crushing me. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, banged her gavel to start the hearing. She asked Dorian to present the allegations, and he stood, his voice deep and clear. We accuse Mr. Gordon Draper, Mrs. Janelle Draper, Mrs. Paula McAllister, and Mr. Leon McAllister of financially abusing Mrs. Hazel Draper, an elderly person, by deceiving her into transferring her entire savings under the pretense of a family trip, only to intentionally exclude her from it. My parents' lawyer stood up, immediately objecting. "Your Honor, my clients did not commit fraud. Mrs. Hazel voluntarily transferred the money as a gift to the family. There is no evidence of coercion." He spoke with confidence, presenting a stack of documents he called a family agreement. My blood boiled. A family agreement? They dared to call that betrayal an agreement? Dorian calmly countered, presenting each piece of evidence. The bank statement showing the $30,000 transfer from my grandmother's account to my father's. Holly's testimony from the airport confirming that my grandmother was deliberately excluded, and my grandmother's own account, recorded in a sworn affidavit. I was called to the witness stand, and as I stood before the court, I felt the piercing gazes of my parents and Aunt Paula. But I wasn't afraid. I recounted everything, from the sweet phone calls, the sudden visit to Tullahoma, to the moment my grandmother was left behind at the airport. I spoke with complete sincerity, my voice trembling as I recalled her desolate expression. They took my grandmother's money, the savings she scraped together her whole life. They lied to her, and they didn't even feel remorse, I said, looking directly at the judge. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge delivered her ruling. Her voice was clear, unwavering. The court finds sufficient evidence of financial abuse against Mrs. Hazel Draper. Mr. Gordon Draper, Mrs. Janelle Draper, Mrs. Paula McAllister, and Mr. Leon McAllister are ordered to repay the full amount of $30,000 to Mrs. Hazel Draper. Additionally, this conduct will be recorded in their financial abuse of an elderly person records, and the defendants will be stripped of any inheritance rights from Mrs. Hazel Draper as well as any future guardianship rights. The courtroom fell silent. My father shot to his feet, his face red with fury. "This is an outrage. We're her family." But the judge banged her gavel, motioning for him to sit down. Aunt Paula burst into tears, though I wasn't sure if they were tears of remorse or just anger at being exposed. Uncle Leon muttered something under his breath while my mother sat silently, head bowed, not saying a word. I didn't feel victorious, only a deep sadness. This wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted justice for my grandmother. As I left the courtroom, dusk was settling in. I clutched the folder, stepping outside, feeling as though a burden had been lifted, but also like I'd lost a part of myself. I had won, but the victory didn't bring the joy I'd expected. On the bus back to Tullahoma, I thought of my grandmother. Her gentle smile, and I knew everything I did was to protect her, to spare her further pain. When I got home, my grandmother was sitting in her armchair. I knelt beside her and recounted everything that happened in court. She listened quietly, nodding slightly. When I finished, she sighed, her voice tinged with sadness. If only they knew how to love truly. Her words cut like a knife, but I held her hand and said, "Grandma, I love you truly, and that's enough." She smiled, a faint but warm smile, and for the first time I felt she was beginning to heal. In the days following the trial, the wooden house in Tullahoma returned to its familiar rhythm, but something had changed. The heavy air of anticipation and worry about what my parents and Aunt Paula might do next was gone. The court's ruling was like a period, closing a painful chapter but opening a new one for my grandmother and me. The $30,000 was returned to her bank account, but she didn't touch a cent of it. "This money is for you, Calvin," she said firmly. "I don't need anything else. Having you is enough." I wanted to protest, to tell her it was her money, the fruit of her life's labor, but her eyes silenced me. I knew she didn't want to dwell on the past, didn't want that pain to continue controlling her life. We began rebuilding our lives, one small step at a time. I decided to stay in Tullahoma, not returning to Greenville. I enrolled in a nearby community college with a pre-med program. Since I was a child, I had dreamed of becoming a doctor, partly inspired by my grandmother's stories of her nursing days, how she cared for patients with all her heart. "I'll save people like you did," I told her one afternoon as we weeded the garden together. She smiled, ruffling my hair. You'll do even better than me, Calvin. I believe in you. To make meaningful use of the restitution money, my grandmother and I decided to join a painting class at the Tullahoma Community Center. It was my idea. I wanted her to try something new, something untainted by past hurts. The class took place every Wednesday evening in a small room filled with the smell of oil paint and the laughter of neighbors. At first, my grandmother was hesitant, saying she hadn't held a paintbrush since her youth. Back then, I drew heart diagrams for doctors. Painting landscapes now will probably be a mess, she joked, but her eyes lit up when she picked up the brush. I sat beside her, clumsily painting a lopsided tree while she carefully sketched Tullahoma's hills, each stroke as gentle as her heart. Those painting classes became the highlight of our week. My grandmother started laughing more, sharing funny stories about spilling paint on her shirt or accidentally painting a bird that looked like a banana. I watched her, seeing life return to her eyes, and I knew I had made the right choice by staying here with her. In the months that followed, I balanced school with volunteering at the local hospital where my grandmother had once worked. I pushed wheelchairs for patients, assisted nurses, and sometimes just sat listening to elderly patients' stories. Each time I walked through the hospital corridors, I felt like I was treading the same path my grandmother once had, and it strengthened my resolve. I studied diligently, spending hours preparing for the MCAT, and whenever I grew tired, I looked at the painting of marigolds my grandmother had hung on my bedroom wall, reminding myself why I was doing this. My grandmother changed too. She became more involved in community activities, not just the painting class, but also senior group meetings. She made new friends who valued her for her kindness and strength. One day, Martha from the bank visited, bringing a plate of homemade cookies. "Hazel, I hear you're quite the artist," Martha said, her eyes twinkling. My grandmother smiled a bit shyly. "Just painting for fun, Martha, but it's joyful." I sat there watching the two women chat and felt warmth in my heart. My grandmother was no longer alone, but not everything was perfect. Sometimes I caught her sitting alone, staring out the window with that familiar sadness in her eyes. I knew she still thought about my parents, about Aunt Paula, about what she had lost. I tried to fill that void, but I knew I couldn't replace the children she loved. I could only be there, love her, and hope it was enough to help her heal. Time passed, and I passed the MCAT with a score high enough to get into medical school. The day I got the results, I ran home and hugged my grandmother. "Grandma, I did it! I'm going to medical school!" She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I knew you would, Calvin. You're my pride." We celebrated with a simple dinner. Her cookies and a plate of spaghetti I clumsily cooked. It was one of the happiest days of my life, but the joy didn't last. In my second year of medical school, my grandmother began to weaken. She coughed more, grew more tired, and sometimes had to stop in the garden to catch her breath. I insisted she see a doctor, though she brushed it off, saying she was just getting old. But the doctor's diagnosis hit me like a punch to the heart. Lung cancer, late stage. "We could try chemotherapy, but it'll be tough," the doctor said, his voice somber. I looked at my grandmother, saw her sitting upright, her eyes calm. "Calvin, I don't want chemo," she said. "I've lived enough. I just want to be home with you." I wanted to argue, to beg her to try, but I knew her mind was made up. I took a leave from school to care for her, but she shook her head. "You have to keep studying, Calvin. Don't let me be a burden." I cried for the first time in front of her. "You're never a burden, Grandma. You're the reason I'm doing all this." She hugged me, and we sat there in the wooden house quietly together. In her final months, my grandmother still tried to live fully. She painted more, gifting her artwork to neighbors and friends. She taught me how to make her cookies properly, laughing heartily when I burned the oven. And she shared stories she'd never told before, about her dreams as a young woman, the times she nearly gave up but stood tall for my father and Aunt Paula. I wrote everything down, not wanting to forget a single moment. The day I graduated medical school, my grandmother was bedridden at home, too weak to sit up. I wore my cap and gown, bringing my diploma to show her. "Grandma, I did it," I said, my voice breaking. She smiled, gripping my hand tightly. "I'm proud of you, Calvin. You're my doctor." It was the happiest day of my life, but also the saddest. That night, my grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep, in the wooden house she loved. I sat in the now silent house, holding her marigold painting, feeling like a part of me was gone forever. But I knew she was still here, in the flowers in the garden, in the scent of cookies lingering in the kitchen, in my heart. She had taught me about love, courage, and standing up for what's right, and I would carry those lessons with me for the rest of my life. I organized my grandmother's funeral at the local church, a small but warm place where she used to attend every Sunday. I chose a clear day, when Tullahoma's hills glowed under the sunlight, as if nature itself wanted to bid her farewell. Standing before the altar, I looked at her photo, her gentle smile, her kind eyes, and tried to keep my voice steady as I delivered the eulogy. "My grandmother, Hazel Draper, was the strongest woman I've ever known," I said, my voice trembling. "She sacrificed her entire life for her family, for the people she loved, and even though she didn't always receive the love she deserved, she never stopped loving. She's the reason I'm standing here today, the reason I know what's right, what matters." The church was filled with people, neighbors, her friends, and even former patients she had cared for. Martha from the bank sat in the front row, wiping away tears. A few people from the painting class brought artworks they had created with her, placing them around the altar as a tribute. I looked around, seeing the love the community had for her, and realized that my grandmother wasn't just my family. She was a part of Tullahoma, someone who left a mark with her kindness and resilience. I sent a message to my parents and Aunt Paula, informing them of her funeral. I didn't expect them to come, but I still wanted them to know. I kept it brief, emotionless. "Grandma passed away. The funeral will be held on Saturday at First Presbyterian Church in Tullahoma." I received no response, no call, no text. On the day of the funeral, I stood at the church door, foolishly hoping they might show up, if only to say a final goodbye. But as the doors closed and the service began, I knew they had chosen not to come. Their absence didn't surprise me, but it still left a lingering ache in my heart. After the funeral, I returned to the wooden house, sitting alone on the porch, looking out at the marigold garden my grandmother loved. I thought about the past few years, from that day at the Atlanta airport to the trial, to her final months. I didn't regret standing up against my parents and Aunt Paula, but I wondered if there could have been a way to avoid our family's collapse. Then I remembered my grandmother's words, "If only they knew how to love truly." And I realized it wasn't me who had torn the family apart. They had done that long ago when they chose selfishness over love. I decided to stay in Tullahoma, not just because it was where my grandmother had lived, but because it was where I felt I belonged. I continued my journey to become a doctor, entering a 3-year residency at Tenova Healthcare, Harton, the hospital where my grandmother had once worked. Each day, walking through the hospital corridors, I felt like she was beside me, encouraging me. I worked hard, learning to care for patients with the dedication she had taught me. "Listen to them, Calvin," she once said. "Sometimes a patient doesn't need medicine. They just need someone to understand them." I carried that lesson into every shift, every patient, knowing I was following the path she wanted for me. One day, while organizing the wooden house, I found an old box under her bed. Inside were letters she had written to me, letters she never sent. They were written during my childhood in Greenville, when I only visited her in the summers. The letters were filled with love, recounting her days in the garden, her thoughts of me, and her dreams for my future. "Calvin, you are my light," one letter read. "No matter how hard life gets, always do what's right, because that's what makes you different." I sat there, reading each letter, tears falling onto the pages. She had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Those letters became my motivation to keep going. I hung her marigold painting in my office at the hospital, a reminder of her and what I was striving to become. I also began writing our story again, from the airport to the trial to her final years. I wrote not to boast or seek revenge, but to preserve her memory, the memory of a woman who taught me that true love requires no conditions and that justice sometimes demands courage. 3 years later, I officially became a doctor at Tenova Healthcare, Harton. The day I received my certification, I stood before her marigold painting and whispered, "Grandma, I did it." I knew she wasn't here to see it, but I felt her smiling somewhere, proud of me. I chose to stay in Tullahoma, dedicating myself to the community she cherished, caring for the patients she once tended to, and living a life I knew would make her proud. I didn't reach out to my parents or Aunt Paula again. They didn't contact me, and I didn't want to see them. The silence between us was a clearer statement than any confrontation could be. But I didn't hate them. I only regretted that they chose a different path, one with no room for the love and sincerity my grandmother spent her life teaching me. Looking back on my journey, I realized that life isn't always fair, but we can choose how to face injustice. My grandmother taught me that true love is sacrifice without expecting anything in return, standing up for those who can't defend themselves, and living with an open heart, no matter how harsh the world may be. I lost her, but I found the meaning of my life through the lessons she left behind. If you're reading this story, I want you to remember that family isn't just those who share your blood, but those who love and cherish you. Don't be afraid to stand up for what's right, even if it means confronting those you once held dear. Justice isn't always easy, but it's worth fighting for. And above all, cherish those who love you truly, like my grandmother did for me. Because they are the ones who will shape who you are, even when they're no longer by your side. Live like my grandmother, with an open heart and unwavering courage, and remember that no matter how hard life tries to knock you down, you always have the strength to stand up for those you love and for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you abundant health, endless love, and the strength to overcome life's obstacles.